Yo guys, welcome back to the channel. I have for you today two different flavors of two-wheel drive Prerunner I-beam suspension kits. And this one here, if you've seen my previous videos, you'll know this is the Proline kit based off an SCX-10.2 crawler platform that I pieced together. And this is built into a short course size body here. So I have a 12.5 wheelbase, 11-inch track width. This one here is the AliExpress version, I'll call it. It's a knockoff version of the Proline. This is all aluminum and has carbon fiber chassis rails. You can get this as a mostly complete kit. You will still need a transmission and a drive shaft to turn this into a slider. Then, of course, you would need your wheels, your body, all of your electronics, and so on. So I'm going to show you guys the differences between these two and talk about a few key things that I found when building the aluminum kit. There's a few things that you need to really change up in order for this to even work right. Right? If you follow the directions for the Proline kit and set it up exactly the same way, there are some major issues. So you're going to want to pay attention if you're thinking about buying the aluminum kit, or if you have it already and you're having issues with it. Pay attention to what I'm going to say in terms of setting up the links and your servo and everything in the front. And it'll work out nice. So far, I have this thing dialed in as far as steering and link geometry and suspension. Pretty happy with it. So let's get into this, guys. Let's talk about the differences between these two. In the future, I will have a shootout video to see which one of these actually performs better. So before we get into the details on this, let me just go over briefly what you're looking at here. 12.5-inch wheelbase on the Proline kit, 11-inch track width. This is running a 3S 3300 kV motor, an Endura trans, has a 20-tooth pinion in it, and a TRX4 rear axle with a portal delete, an SSD portal delete, but I have the remote locking diff set up on this truck. So from my controller, I can lock and unlock the diff. This truck, I clocked it on my GPS at about 22 miles an hour with the current gearing, and I'm pretty happy with that. I don't think it needs more. I'm also running the double clutch long travel rear suspension kit with 5-inch Proline Power Stroke shocks in the rear, 90 mil shocks up front. But I'll show you guys the differences when I get the body off. This one is a 12.3 wheelbase, 9-inch track width to fit under the body here, of course, especially in the rear with the tires tucked under. 2S I'm running on this mainly because of the battery size. I couldn't really fit a bigger battery under the bed without jacking the back of the truck up. But 2S with a 5200 kV motor, same exact transmission. I do need to get a 20-tooth pinion for this. For right now, I just have a 19-tooth on here. And I'm going to share with you another tip. When you buy this kit, order different gears for the rear axle. Order up an 824 gear kit. I will link that up down below along with the entire kit. It's like an extra $5 and you're going to pick up a lot of speed. This truck I clocked at 15 miles an hour initially. After I changed that ring and pinion in the rear axle, I got up to a little over 19 miles an hour. So I think if I get up to the 20-tooth pinion in there, these trucks are going to be pretty similar in speed. The other big difference, and probably also responsible for some of the speed difference, is this truck is running 4.5-inch tires. This truck is running 4.19-inch tires. So this is more of a class 1 crawler tire, and this would be closer to a class 2, like right kind of in between. So you're going to get a little bit more speed with the bigger tires. Of course, they just have more of a rollout to them. But yeah, let me get these bodies off and I'll show you guys a more detailed look at both of these trucks. So we're going to start with the Ali Beams kit here. And you'll see the carbon fiber chassis. It's actually a really nice chassis. It's pretty thick. All this aluminum is, it's made pretty nicely. These swing links here for the steering pivot on little bearings inside. And one thing I noticed with this kit, because everything is, of course, aluminum, the battery tray is aluminum, your skid is aluminum, you know, the whole deal. Your servo mount here goes chassis rail to rail up front. The rigidity of this thing, I don't know, like, I'm really trying to bend this and flex it around, and it barely moves. It is super rigid, as opposed to this, which uses, I have Hot Racing, which it's pretty much standard SCX2 frame rails, but they're made by Hot Racing. I even added a little brace here, but it has a plastic skid, has a plastic battery tray, has an aluminum servo mount, but it's only one-sided, so it doesn't really act as a cross brace. I did add some additional cross bracing. I added this cross brace here on these. These are the double clutch shock towers that are basically what the long arm, long travel suspension kit is. But you can see, I mean, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see. Yeah, look at how much flex is in this system. And you could ignore all of my foam here. This is just an effort to protect the body here, these little bumps on the side, but there is an absolute crap ton of flex in this chassis. Now, how much of that is the steel rails versus the carbon? I don't know, but I think my plan with this one is I'm going to go to an aluminum skid, which is same as what's on there, and I'm going to go to this style servo mount that just really kind of braces that chassis up front. I think those two things, and probably also an aluminum. I'm going to try the double clutch battery tray that he makes. I have that showing up shortly. I'm going to throw that on here and hopefully gain a little bit of rigidity because, of course, for suspension movement and suspension action, you want your whole chassis to be nicely rigid. So the suspension, instead of everything just flexing around willy-nilly, you actually get some nice suspension movement. But so that right away is one huge difference between the two, and I'd say that's a pro for this one, a con for that one. So that's 1 point right there for this kit. I am running these little Endura side plates on both of them. On this one, I have the added little, this is just an actual like little step bumper under there. I just covered with foam. They're not really in the right position to really stick out of either body. So this one, I'm probably not even going to run it. It would be a little too wide anyway. I left them on here for some added weight and then just also to protect the body. But we'll see. I don't know if I'm going to do anything on here. But on this truck, I am running a Rift trailing arm. On this, these are actually stock Bomber trailing arms. So they're a little bit shorter than what's on there, and I have them mounted up to the front here. One of the reasons I did that was just for the placement for my sway bar back here. Just the Bomber links ended up working out better than the stock ones. And I just liked having it mounted up front here too. It gave me a little more clearance up here. You can run the ones that come in the kit. They're not the greatest looking, but they will work. You can just run them. If you run them in the center hole, they're going to be about the same exact distance to your rear axle. But I had these and they just worked out better for the way that I have this set up with my sway bar. And I'm going to show you guys that in a minute. Another tip I have for you guys. So if you look in the pictures of this kit, it doesn't come with any instructions, so you just have to go based off of pictures. It shows the trailing arms mounted in this top double shear, but what that does is just lowers your axle down and creates a much taller ride height. So I mounted these just like what it shows the Proline kit to do, is to just put a little spacer in here. You can use like a hollow ball or an aluminum spacer and just mount your arms to the outside of that. It's going to be fine, just plenty of strength. And what that does is just lets the axle sit up higher so that you can get, you know, a nice tuck. These wheels will tuck up into the body and you're going to get a good amount of travel. I mean, if you look at that, that's really compressing nicely. Running these are Proline Power Strokes that are for the rear of a Traxxas Slash. So these are about 102, 103 millimeters. I got a spring kit, so this is going to change. Springs are going to change with the weight of this. And for now, I'm just running these little shock keys that I added to the rear shock towers just to get the right amount of extension and compression on these. I have these little bump stops off of an Axial Rift in here. Just added little compression bump stop on here. But I'm getting the right, like perfect amount. Those bump stops engage right where the links start to hit up into the battery tray. Just resists the extra little bit of compression there. And then side to side, I'm really getting some nice articulation here up into the, I'll show you with the body on in a minute. This is a Element Enduro sway bar on here. It comes with 3 different thicknesses of sway bars, so you can fine tune those. You do have to drill. Depending, I tried a couple different spots actually and ended up here. But you can drill some extra holes in the chassis just to mount this up. I did have to flip these arms around. These normally face in, but there was clearance issues, so you can make this work. It was a little tricky. It fit perfectly on that chassis with 0 issues, and I think it's really just the difference with the thickness of this chassis. And probably the battery tray and so on. But I think this is a little bit wider, so I had to kind of mess with that. But everything worked, and it feels pretty good right now. So I don't, depending on how much weight I add to that, we'll see what happens there. But Yeah, so Proline Power Strokes right now, I just have these green springs in them and they feel nice. I am running some very light fluid in there. It's actually 3-weight mountain bike fluid. We'll see how that works out long term. As I add weight to that, I may end up going up on that. In the front here, these are Proline Pro Spec scalar shocks, I think they're called, the Pro Spec scalar. Not easy to say. And these, I think I have like 30, 35 weight in those. These are just some RC Lions. These are just some RC Lions 90 mil shocks. And I'm just using those as a secondary. If you run these inverted, it leaves a little bit of an air gap at the top here where the piston sits initially. So right now, these secondary shocks are not really doing anything. Like when at this part of the travel, they're not really doing anything. But when you get deeper in, that piston sits down into the oil and it really starts to work. It adds a lot of like bottom out resistance. But when you're up high, like if you're floating the front end up over whoops and stuff, you get a faster suspension action here than you would down there, which is exactly what I was after. So they work out. On these are actually set to 95 millimeter. Let me measure these. So here's where things start getting interesting. Let's talk about this. Ran into all kinds of issues trying to set up this front end. Found out that the sprung shock, because of the width of this shock retainer on the spring retainer on the bottom, you can only fit this on the back. If you run this up front, you see how close the shock comes here to the link mount. You're going to hang up that spring retainer on here every single time, and the spring is going to rub. So you have no choice. You have to run this sprung damper on the back portion, whereas on the Proline kit, it's fine on the front. There were no clearance issues. It's close, but there were no issues, right? Not a huge deal. But now I'm running these. I added the longer rod end on here. So this is actually set to 95, but the down travel is limited because this shock is 90. This shock is actually stopping it from dropping down even more. But it worked out better like that. The spacing now. On the top here, you need to run these little spacers. These are, and you get a bunch of spacers in the kit, but it doesn't hurt to have extras on hand. These are 5 mil spacers, so I have 5 mils on the top. Down on the bottom of this shock, I'm running a 3 mil spacer because you need to get clearance here, right? But if you can't run a 5 mil because if you're running a 5 mil, depending on the tires you're running, you see how close that is? That could rub. So that was kind of, you really had to figure that one out. On the opposite side, same deal up here, 5 mils on the top, 5 mil on the back of this shock here at the bottom, and a 5 mil there. So they're all 5 mil spacers on the shocks, top and bottom, except for this side, the passenger side. You have a 3 mil on here, and I have no spacer on this one. And you'll see, you don't want to run a spacer there because that front shock goes down on a little bit of an angle. So kind of a little odd. Took a little bit of doing to figure this out, but everything works and I'm getting nice full travel, except for one thing I'm going to point out. Look at the front of this shock. You see how we're getting a full up travel there? Now watch over here. See, we're not getting full travel. And that has nothing to do with the shock, has nothing to do with anything else, has everything to do with this right here. The top of this front support hits into the mount for that beam right there. Look. Right? And that's it. There's nothing you can do about it. That is in the design. There's nothing you could change that's going to change that. I did file the top of this a little bit just to clearance it, just to gain a tiny bit. I could probably go a little bit more. I don't think it's that big a deal. I think I'm just going to leave it and just know that this side is limited by just a couple millimeters of up travel. A few other things I noticed here, and here's where things really get interesting, and pay attention to this more than anything. You guys can probably figure out the shocks yourself. This is the most important part. I went with stock plastic Axial knuckles. The knuckles that came with this were kind of crappy. They didn't fit very well. There were a lot of play in them. They come with these little like bronze bushings that fit into the aluminum arms, and one of them wasn't even machined right. It wouldn't even fit. Actually, I think they actually fit into the knuckle itself, but either way, it wouldn't even fit in there. I couldn't even use it, right? So, and then the other one that did fit, there was a lot of slop in them. The distance from your link mount here to the pivot was different than what the stock one is, and it just really didn't work out that great. it was just a sloppy kind of mess. So I canned those and I went with stock Axial ones, and they worked out much better. Just pay attention here. You want to run your tie rod here to the bottom and then add a little spacer in this top double shear section here. You will also need these shoulder screws to use the stock arms. They just work out much better. And then you have plastic that is rotating here. So it's just not going to wear like those bronze bushings would or aluminum would. So this to me is a much better setup. I don't have any issue. I'd almost rather have plastic here anyway, because if this takes enough of a big hit, I'd rather break a cheap plastic knuckle than break this aluminum arm here. You can get replacements for these, but you can't just get one or the other. You have to buy the full front kit. And I want to say it's like around $70, $80. You will get everything. But if you break one, you're buying the whole kit. So I'd rather have kind of a weak link on this whole setup. And I just think you end up with a much better, tighter fitting kind of everything. Now, here's where things really got interesting. And I'm going to show you guys the difference here. Let me stand both of these up. So if you notice, this is the Proline kit. This is how they show you to install it in the video, in the manual, everything else. So you have your front connector link here that connects your two swing links. You have the link here that goes to your servo horn, which is in the center. And then you have your other tie rod here that goes down to this wheel. And then from the back of this link goes down to that wheel. Now, I tried, is that going to stay? No, probably not. I tried setting it up like that in this truck. All sorts of issues. These links here were binding like crazy. Anytime I tried to compress the suspension on this side, this tie rod was hitting into this link. This tie rod was hitting into the swing link. So you could not steer. Let me show you here. If you compress this, I can steer this back and forth. There is nothing hitting anywhere. It doesn't matter which one I compress both of them. I have perfect clearance on all the links. Nothing is binding. Nothing is clashing into each other. I could not get this to work at all in the stock configuration. If I set this up like the Proline kit, nope, didn't work. So what you notice here, front link that connects your two swing links, exact same position. I had to reverse these two. The link that goes to your servo horn and this tie rod that goes down here to your driver's side tire. So I move this one up to the center position here, and the servo horn link is in the back. Now, that created another problem. It solved the problems up here. Nothing was interfering, but it created a problem if you mount the servo. The spline section of the servo is supposed to be up in the front. And what I found, the way to make this work, turn your servo around so that the spline part is in the rear. And then what I'm running, you could run a normal servo horn in here and you'll have, just find the right horn that fits in there. I don't even know which one at this point, but I think you'd want to look for something like a 20 mil horn, 22 even. You could, if you run a longer one, you could really straighten out this length too. But I'm running this, and I recommend you guys do this too. I'm running this Kimbro heavy duty servo saver. I'll link this up down below. It is plastic, but it's really built very tough. And the spring inside is one of the strongest that I felt for this style of servo saver. Zero clearance issues. You're limited to what type of saver you can go to, because as you compress the suspension, it could clash into that there. So this thing fits perfectly. I don't have to use any kind of spacers under this. This is just a regular Spectrum servo. Not a big deal on the servo here. It's just a cheapie I had lying around for testing, but everything worked out perfect. So my recommendation, don't even play around. Just go in and set them up in this orientation right from the start. Another thing I had to do to adjust, to get your toe geometry correct here. This thing had a ton of toe out, and that I'll explain why that's bad in a second. What I had to do is with the stock rod ends on here, I ended up with a big space here. They just weren't, I had this, if you thread these apart, right? So thread these apart so it pushes the swing links out. What that does is it will toe in your front wheels. Stock, if you run these full tight, all the way threaded in, you get a crazy amount of toe out. So I had to thread these out. And what I ended up doing, I wasn't comfortable leaving that amount of threads exposed here. It just goes into these plastic rod ends. So I swapped them out for, these are Capra, Axial Capra straight rod ends, and they're a little bit longer, so you can see I have a little bit of a gap on either side, which is totally fine. One other thing to make note of, on the Proline kit, these links are true turnbuckle style, so one of them has reverse thread, so you could go in here right now and fine tune it with a wrench, and you could spread it apart or bring them together just by without taking stuff apart. None of these have reverse thread. They are standard thread on both sides, so if you want to adjust any one of these links, you have to pull this out and then twist one of the rod ends or the other. So not a big deal, but just make note of that. So yeah, I'm running Axial rod ends up here, and that's about it. All of the other ones worked out fine. So this is critical to getting everything right. And one of the reasons you don't want a ton of toe out is when you drive this, because of the geometry, I don't know if I'm going to get it to do it here. Yeah. You see how when you turn the wheels, like twist them in and out, toe in, toe out, it actually has an effect on the suspension. So if you have a crazy amount of toe out, it's going to want to like suck the front of the suspension down, and you're going to lose some travel. If you have too much toe in, it's actually going to do the reverse, and your truck's going to ride really high in the front. So you kind of want to get it just a little bit of toe out, and you could fine tune it with this link as you go and as you drive, and just kind of play around with it and see what works out the best for you guys. And it's going to be based on the shocks you're running and the weight and everything else, but just know that your toe in, toe out does have an effect on this. What else can I cover here? I think that kind of covers everything for now. This is a work in progress. This may end up changing. If I can't get similar performance from this truck that I got from this big beast here, I don't know. I mean, it's cool. My initial idea was to build this one up more of like the stock configuration. You know, I did mess with the rear suspension here just to get more travel. Stock, if you just run it straight up here with the short shocks that come with it, take the shocks that come with this thing and get rid of them. If you have a crawler, you can use them for a crawler build, but they're not worthy of this truck at all. They're just not the right length or anything. You want to go with 90s up front, and in the back, you can do a setup like this very cheap. These shock keys are like $10. Get yourself a good like 100 or 110. You can do a 110 millimeter shock back here, run it up to this extra hole here, and you'll end up with a good amount of travel. So that's my recommendation. To, at the very least, do this, because if you run a 90 mil shock in the back, you're going to be very limited to what you can do. I have my start of my front Prerunner style bumper here, which is going to be very similar to this one that I brazed up. I was really happy how this turned out. Made a little aluminum skid plate. This was my first attempt at brazing, and I'm really happy with it. I think it came out really cool. And I'm going to do that for this one. My ultimate plan, if this thing dries, I'm going to get this thing out for a test, hopefully, in this video. And if this thing drives really well and I'm happy with it and I'm going to leave it like that, I'm going to go all in and chop the bed out, and I'm going to braze up a full cage back here with some spare tire carrier and maybe a faux radiator and a couple other cool features. And then I'm going to incorporate the shock mount into that cage. So I will angle these more forward like they should be. And I may even go with a longer shock at some point. Right now, I think this is a good amount of travel. Let me show you again with the body on. You know, I didn't want to go crazy with this body because I don't know if I'm really going to end up using it long term, but I had to chop it out for the shock towers in the back. You really have no choice. And this is what I was saying. If you're trying to run a big battery, look, this is sitting directly on the battery. You really can't achieve any good positioning with this body if you run a bigger battery in this truck, right? So what I end up with in the rear, you see if I articulate these, my tires are actually hitting the body. So I can't really get any more up travel on this truck. Aside from the links hitting the bottom of the battery tray, this is pretty much it, you know, but I'm pretty happy with that. I think it looks pretty good. In the front, you're limited here with the shock towers. I mean, the body, get these on. The body sits directly on these shock towers. You can't get it to sit any lower. It's impossible. And this is the maximum up travel you can get. And that's it. You know, you're not going to tuck these tires. Now, if you're running bigger tires, they're going to look a little more tucked in. It's up to you. I feel like these look more appropriate on this truck. but that's just me. It's up to you. If you want to run a 4.5, go for it. I think that would be the max limit. If you go 4.75 on these, it's going to look like a crawler to me. I don't think it's going to work. And then it's going to sit higher. High center of gravity on this truck means it's going to flip over all the time. So I'm pretty happy with the stance on this thing. So yeah, if it works out and this thing actually handles well, I'm going to chop this whole piece out and I'll make a cage, support the rear fenders, do some spare tires back here. I think it'll look really cool. So I'm really hoping that's the case. I don't want to necessarily turn this into another short course build like this one, just because I already have that. I'm happy with that. I like it the way it is. I'd like to be able to keep this one as is. So we're going to find out. I'm going to finish up this front bumper, and then I'm going to take this thing out for a test drive and see if it shows enough promise. That's what we're going to run with. One other thing I didn't cover here, these similar wheels to these are adjustable offset wheels. And you see I'm running these as a deep dish. You can build them in multiple ways. I have these set up as a deep dish with a huge 17 millimeter hub. You can see that in there. Huge 17 millimeter hub just to get the offset that I needed to make this 11 inches wide. I even have a slightly wider wheel hex on my axle there. On these are also adjustable offset. I have these set in the shallowest offset, the most or the least negative offset. It's a -3 offset. This is set up as a -17 offset. I even switched the wheel hubs on these to 3 millimeter deep wheel hubs just to get these. You can see, I mean, they kind of slightly rub. They might wear the paint off a little bit, but that's the best I can do with these. Maybe I can go with a slightly narrower wheel hex, but I don't want to make this thing too crazy skinny because of stability and stuff like that. So this is a crazy long video, guys. I hope you appreciate this. Just wanted to say, pay attention to these links when you set this thing up. There's no other way to do it. I fought with this thing for hours. There's no other way to do it. It only works this way. Reverse your servo around so that the spline section is in the back. Run your horn or your servo saver forward to get the positioning right with that link again, and you're going to be good. Pay attention to your shocks. Make sure nothing is rubbing or hitting anywhere. Use the spacers like I mentioned earlier, and you'll be good. Everything in the back is a lot more straightforward. Mount your trailing arms to the bottom of your axle instead of the top, just to get this extra, lower in the back. It's going to ride, it's going to drive and handle a lot better like that. You don't want this truck sitting up high in the back. It's just going to flip over all the time. I got to add more weight in the back. I want this to have much more rearward weight bias. Speaking of weights, this thing all said and done, body, battery, the whole deal, big 3S battery on here, 8.5 pounds. This thing so far is 6.5. It's going to get heavier, especially if I do that cage on the back and add some spare tires. But I'm thinking I'd like to add like a good half pound, maybe a little bit more to the rear of this truck just to balance it out. Front bumper is going to add a little bit of weight, but I'm going to do a whole rear bumper too. So hopefully that works out. But that's it, guys. I know this was a crazy long video, but I just wanted to share with you guys. There's a lot of information here. These trucks are not what I would consider like a beginner build. You really need to kind of know what you're doing to make these things turn out right and handle worth a damn. I've seen a lot of videos of these things just not handling well at all. And to me, what's the point of going through all this trouble? It's not a really inexpensive build either. By the time all is said and done, these turn into a $500 build pretty easily. I just want to show you guys the other difference here. So just so you understand how much bigger this build is than this one. I mean, it sits right over the top of the other body. You can see how crazy, that looks. But yeah, but check out, I will have all of these videos on both of these trucks in my iBeams builds playlist. At some point in the future, when the weather improves outside, springtime maybe, hopefully sooner, I will get these out for a little head-to-head battle, and we're going to see which one performs the best. Not only performance-wise, but just the driving experience is the most important thing to me. I know this one should technically have an advantage because it is wider and a little bit longer, has more suspension travel, has bigger tires. So I expect this one to do better. But what I'm looking for overall is the driving experience, just the user experience with both of these. If this ends up being as much fun, but just for a slightly different reason, maybe it's a little more nimble, a little more agile because it is going to be lighter. This one, I feel like, is going to hold up better long term. It just feels more robust, and it's a beefier build. This one's pretty flexible. I don't know. And everything's plastic up front. Who knows how that's going to hold up? So far, so good, but fingers crossed. So we'll see. But yeah, it's going to be about the driving experience. I'm going to have a wide range of kind of testing parameters and just give you guys an idea of what direction you might want to go with a build like this. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. I'm going to have more videos of these in the near future. Later.